In the basement of the Massachusetts Historical Society. Dust motes danced in the thin beam of afternoon light. Dr. Eleanor Hayes adjusted her glasses as she carefully opened another acid-free box of Civil War photographs. After 15 years as the Society's lead archivist, she had developed a sixth sense for significant finds, and something about this recently donated collection made her pulse quicken. "Ryan, bring the white gloves and the scanning equipment," she called to her graduate assistant. "I think we might have something interesting here." The young man hurried over, his enthusiasm for historical artifacts always evident. "What is it, Dr. Hayes?" Eleanor gently lifted a sepia-tone photograph from its protective sleeve. "Look at this. Union soldier, formal portrait, dated April 1865. She turned the photograph over. Where elegant handwriting provided identification, CPL. Thomas Winters, 20th Massachusetts Infantry, April 18, 1865. Ryan leaned closer. "He looks happy. Not common in these formal portraits." "Indeed." Eleanor's trained eye noted the unusual smile on the soldier's face. Civil War portraits typically featured stoic expressions due to the long exposure times and the solemnity of the era. "So let's scan this and add it to the new exhibition catalog." As Ryan prepared the equipment, Eleanor continued sorting through the collection. A yellowed newspaper clipping caught her attention. Her blood ran cold as she read the headline. "Brave son of Boston laid to rest, CPL. Thomas Winters. Fallen at Petersburg, buried March 27, 1865. "Ryan," she whispered, "look at this date." The young man glanced over. "March 27th? But the photograph is from April 18th. "Exactly." Eleanor placed the photograph and clippings side by side. "According to this obituary, Corporal Winters was already 3 weeks dead when this portrait was supposedly taken." Ryan's face paled slightly. "There must be a mistake with the dates." "Perhaps." Eleanor wasn't convinced. She'd seen misdated photographs before, but something about this discrepancy troubled her. The soldier's eyes in the portrait seemed too alive, too knowing. "Let's dig deeper into this collection." As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the basement archives, neither spoke of the chill that had settled over the room. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Corporal Winters was watching them from his impossible photograph, his smile holding secrets lost to time. Later that evening, as Eleanor drove home through Boston's narrow streets, her mind remained fixed on the photograph. The rational explanation was simple: a clerical error, a misdated portrait, a mix-up of similar-looking soldiers. Yet 30 years of historical research had taught her that sometimes the most unsettling discoveries were those that defied simple explanation. She didn't notice the figure standing at the corner, dressed in a Union Army uniform, watching her car pass by. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Eleanor's office as she spread her research materials across the desk. After a restless night filled with strange dreams of Civil War battlefields, she was determined to solve the mystery of Corporal Winters. "I've pulled everything we have on the 20th Massachusetts," Ryan said, placing a stack of folders beside her. "And I've contacted the National Archives for their service records." "Perfect." Eleanor opened her laptop. "Let's start with what we know for certain." The facts were straightforward. Thomas Winters, age 22, had enlisted in 1863. His unit fought at the Battle of Petersburg in March 1865, where Union forces finally broke through Confederate lines. According to military records, Winters had been killed by artillery fire on March 25th and buried 2 days later. "The photograph has to be misdated," Ryan insisted. "Maybe it was taken earlier and processed later." "Possible," Eleanor conceded. "But look at this." She pointed to a detail in the portrait. "See that medal? That's a Regimental Medal of Valor. According to a service record, it was awarded posthumously on April 2nd. Ryan frowned. "So he's wearing a medal in the photograph that he couldn't have received while alive?" "Exactly." Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "And there's something else. I checked with Professor Blackwood in the photography department. He confirmed that the photographic process used in this portrait wasn't available until 1865. The chemical signature and paper type are consistent with the April date." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martin Chun, the Society's director, entered with a concerned expression. "Eleanor, a word?" He gestured to the hallway. Outside, Martin's voice was low. "I understand you're pursuing this Winters photograph discrepancy." "Yes, it's quite the historical puzzle. I'd prefer if you kept this research discreet." Martin shifted uncomfortably. "The donors of the collection, the Winters family, are major benefactors of the Society." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I abandon legitimate historical research because of donors?" "Of course not. Just ... tread carefully. There are stories about the Winters family. Old Boston rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Martin hesitated. "Nothing substantial. Just talk about family curses, strange occurrences. the usual superstitious nonsense that surrounds old money. As Martin walked away, Eleanor felt a new dimension opening in her investigation. When she returned to her office, Ryan was staring at his computer screen. "Dr. Hayes, I found something strange." He turned the screen toward her. "I've been cross-referencing other photographs from the 20th Massachusetts. In these group photos taken in January and February 1865, I can't find Winters anywhere." Eleanor studied the photographs. Maybe he was elsewhere during these shoots. Maybe. Ryan hesitated. But one found his name in the roster for these exact dates and locations. He should be in these pictures. Eleanor felt that same chill from the basement return. It's almost as if that book quotes as if he wasn't really there. Ryan finished until after he died. The evening traffic crawled along Beacon Street as Eleanor headed home, her mind replaying the day's discoveries. The historical inconsistencies surrounding Corporal Winters defied rational explanation. A soldier who doesn't appear in photographs when alive but smiles for the camera after his death. It violated everything she understood about historical documentation. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against her windshield. Eleanor switched on her wipers and slowed as visibility worsened. The streetlights of Beacon Hill cast eerie glows through the downpour, transforming the historic neighborhood into something otherworldly. At a red light, she reached for her phone to check the time. The screen reflected a figure standing on the sidewalk beside her caravan in a dark blue uniform. Rain somehow not touching him. Eleanor's head snapped up, but the sidewalk was empty. "Get it together," she muttered to herself as the light turned green. Lack of sleep and too much time with old photographs were clearly affecting her. Arriving home, Eleanor hurried through the rain to her brownstone apartment. The power was out, not uncommon during Boston storms, forcing her to navigate by the flashlight on her phone. The beam caught something on her doormat, a small puddle of water, as if someone had recently stood there. Inside, Eleanor lit candles and tried to dismiss her unease. She was a historian, committed to evidence and fact, not ghost stories and imagination. Yet as thunder rumbled overhead, she found herself examining the photographs of Thomas Winters she'd brought home. In the candlelight, the soldier's eyes seemed to follow her. His smile, unusual for the era, now appeared knowing, almost mocking. Eleanor stared at the impossible date. April 18th, 1865. Weeks after his confirmed death. A loud knock at her door made her jump. Who would be visiting in this storm? Through the peephole, she saw Ryan, drenched from the rain. "Sorry to bother you," he said when she opened the door, "but I found something you need to see right away." Eleanor let him in, noticing how he shivered despite the mild temperature. "The National Archives sent over Winters' complete file," Ryan explained, pulling papers from his waterproof bag, including personal effects inventory. "Look at this." The inventory, dated March 26, 1865, listed items found on Corporal Winters' body: uniform, pocket watch, letters from home, and a contract with a Boston photography studio dated for April 18, 1865. "He had an appointment with a photographer scheduled for after his death," Eleanor whispered. "There's more." Ryan's voice shook slightly. "I found accounts from soldiers in his unit. 3 different men claimed to have seen Winters after the battle where he supposedly died. They were dismissed as suffering from battle fatigue. The candles flickered as if a draft had moved through the room. Though no windows were open. "Ryan," Eleanor said carefully, "do you believe in ghosts?" "I believe in evidence," he replied. "And the evidence suggests something impossible happened with Corporal Winters." Another knock at the door startled them both. Eleanor approached cautiously and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The knocking came again, more insistent. Eleanor opened the door a crack, chain still in place. The hallway remained empty, but a puddle of water had formed on the floor, as if someone had been standing there. "There's no one," she began, turning back to Ryan. But Ryan was staring past her, his face drained of color, looking at something or someone in the hallway that Eleanor couldn't see. Ryan's terrified expression lasted only a moment before he blinked and shook his head. "Sorry, I thought I saw ... Never mind." He rubbed his eyes. "I haven't been sleeping well since we found that photograph." Eleanor closed the door, double-checking the lock. "What did you see?" "Just a shadow." "My imagination." Ryan didn't sound convinced. "Let's focus on the facts." Eleanor agreed, though the unsettling atmosphere lingered. They spread the documents across her dining table, working by candlelight as the storm continued outside. The historical record painted a clear picture. Corporal Thomas Winters died at Petersburg on March 25, 1865. His body was identified by fellow soldiers prepared for burial and interred on March 27th. Yet multiple anomalies suggested something else had occurred. "Here's something interesting," Eleanor said, examining a letter from the Winters family papers. Thomas had a twin brother, James. They enlisted together. but James was discharged after being wounded at Gettysburg in 1863. Ryan leaned forward. Could that explain the photograph? Maybe it's James posing as Thomas? Possible, but why would he wear his dead brother's uniform and medal? And why would the family label it as Thomas? They continued working until nearly midnight, when the storm finally abated and power returned to the neighborhood. Ryan gathered his materials, still visibly unsettled. "Take tomorrow morning off," Eleanor told him. "Get some rest." After Ryan left, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the photograph of Thomas Winters. In the harsh electric light, the image seemed different, the smile less pronounced, the eyes less alive. Was she projecting meaning onto an ordinary historical artifact? As she prepared for bed, Eleanor noticed a folded paper that must have fallen from Ryan's files. It was a photocopy of a letter, dated April 20th, 1865. "My dearest Martha, I have fulfilled my promise and sat for the portrait. The photographer seemed unsettled by my presence, though he completed his work admirably. You will receive it shortly. Keep it close, as I once kept you. Though they buried my body, I could not rest until my oath was fulfilled. A soldier's word must remain unbroken, even beyond death. Now I may finally join my comrades in whatever lies beyond this world. Forever yours." Thomas. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the letter. The handwriting matched samples of Thomas Winters' correspondence from before his death. If authentic, this letter suggested the impossible, that somehow Thomas Winters had returned after death to fulfill a promise. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. Every creak of her old brownstone sent her heart racing. Twice she thought she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom. Once she was certain someone had called her name. Morning brought no relief. Eleanor woke to find her front door standing open, though she distinctly remembered locking it. On her doormat lay a single object, a tarnished Union Army button. The Winters estate stood on 5 acres in Brookline, a grand Victorian mansion that had housed 6 generations of the family. Eleanor drove through the ornate iron gates, noting how the property seemed trapped in time, preserved like a historical exhibit. After her disturbing night, she had decided to approach the donors directly. If anyone could explain the mystery surrounding Thomas Winters, it would be his descendants. Margaret Winters, a thin woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and perfect posture, received Eleanor in a parlor that could have been transported directly from 1865. "Dr. Hayes." "What an unexpected pleasure," Margaret said, though her tone suggested it was neither unexpected nor a pleasure. "Tea." "Thank you." Eleanor accepted the delicate porcelain cup. "Mrs. Winters, I'm researching the materials your family donated, particularly those related to Corporal Thomas Winters." Margaret's hand trembled slightly. "I see. And what has prompted this specific interest?" Eleanor decided on directness. "We've discovered some inconsistencies regarding Thomas's photograph, the one dated after his death." The silence that followed was profound. Margaret set down her teacup with deliberate care. "I was told your institution would handle these materials with appropriate discretion. We're handling them with appropriate historical rigor," Eleanor countered, "which means investigating anomalies." Margaret rose and walked to a portrait above the fireplace, a painting of 2 identical young men in civilian clothes. Thomas and James Winters, my great-great-granduncles, inseparable in life, until the war came. "I read that James was wounded at Gettysburg." "Yes. He returned home, but Thomas continued fighting. They wrote to each other daily." Margaret's voice softened. "When Thomas died at Petersburg, something in James broke. The family accounts say he refused to accept it." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm room. "What do you mean?" "James became convinced that Thomas would return to fulfill a promise to sit for a dual portrait they had planned before the war. He waited at the photography studio every day, and on April 18, 1865, Margaret turned, her expression unreadable. On April 18th, according to family legend, James arrived at the studio to find Thomas already there, sitting for his portrait. The photographer fainted when James entered. When he recovered, only James remained, insisting his brother had finally kept his promise. Eleanor's mind raced. "The photograph in your donation is the one taken that day. The only photograph of Thomas Winters that exists." Margaret returned to her seat. James claimed his brother smiled in the portrait because he was finally at peace, ready to move on. "You're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Dr. Hayes. I'm telling you our family history." Margaret poured more tea with steady hands. "James had the portrait displayed at Thomas's empty grave, then kept it in his bedroom until he died in 1912. Every generation since has preserved it. Why donate it now? I have no children. The Winters line ends with me." Margaret met Eleanor's gaze directly. "But there's another reason. The portrait has become active again? Active? Eleanor repeated. 3 months ago, I noticed changes. The smile seemed wider. The eyes followed movement. Margaret's clinical tone belied the strangeness of her words. Then the dreams began. Thomas speaking to me, saying it was time to move on, that something unfinished remained. Eleanor thought of her own strange experiences. Mrs. S.E. Winters, has anyone else reported unusual occurrences around the photograph? The housekeeper refused to dust the room where it hung. My late husband complained of a presence watching him. Margaret leaned forward. Dr. Hayes, whatever's happening with that photograph, I believe donating it was the right decision. The burden of Thomas Winters should no longer fall on family shoulders. As Eleanor drove away from the estate, her phone rang. It was Ryan, his voice tight with tension. Dr. Hayes, I think someone broke into the archives last night. Nothing's missing, but Winters' photograph has changed. Changed how? The uniform, ... It's wet, like it's been out in the rain. Eleanor canceled her afternoon appointments and drove straight to the Historical Society. The main building, a stately Beacon Hill brownstone, stood silent against the bright afternoon sky. She found Ryan waiting in the basement archives, his face drawn with fatigue. Show me, she said without preamble. Ryan led her to the preservation room where the Winters photograph was being stored in a climate-controlled case. Even from the doorway, Eleanor could see something was wrong. The sepia tones of the image had darkened in places, as if portions of the photograph were damp. I discovered it this morning, Ryan explained, unlocking the case. At first I thought it was water damage, but look, he carefully lifted the photograph with gloved hands. The moisture is only on the uniform area, and it's not damaging the paper. Eleanor examined the photograph. The uniform in the image appeared sodden, as if the soldier had been standing in the previous night's downpour. Yet the paper itself remained structurally sound, with no warping or deterioration. This is impossible, she whispered, though the word had lost meaning in the face of mounting evidence. There's more. Ryan hesitated. The security footage from last night shows something ... unusual. In the small security office, Ryan queued up the digital recording. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. during the height of the storm. The archive room was dark except for emergency lighting. Watch the preservation case, Ryan instructed. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a shadow moved across the room, distinctly human-shaped but indistinct, as if the camera couldn't properly focus on it. The shadow approached the case containing the Winters photograph. The case opened, though no one visibly touched it, and the photograph rose slightly, hovering. Eleanor felt her scientific worldview crumbling. Equipment malfunction? I checked. The system was functioning normally. The footage continued. The shadow remained by the case for several minutes, then moved toward the camera. For a split second, the shadow solidified into a more recognizable form. A Union soldier, water streaming from his uniform. Then the video feed cut to static. It resumed normal recording 3 minutes later, Ryan said quietly. The case was closed and the shadow was gone. Eleanor sat in stunned silence. Her historian's mind scrambled for rational explanations, but found none. Has anyone else seen this footage? Only the night security guard. He's the one who alerted me. Ryan rubbed his temples. He's worked here 20 years and said he's never seen anything like it. Eleanor thought of Margaret Winters' words, the portrait has become active again. Ryan, I think we need to understand why Thomas Winters returned for that photograph in 1865, and why his presence seems to be intensifying now, 160 years later. You really believe it's him? A ghost? Eleanor chose her words carefully. I believe something connected to Thomas Winters is interacting with our reality, centered around that photograph. Whether it's what people traditionally call a ghost or something else, I don't know. What do we do? Research. That's what historians do. Eleanor's professional instincts reasserted themselves. If Thomas Winters returned to fulfill an obligation in 1865, perhaps he's trying to fulfill another one now. They returned to the archives, driven by a new sense of purpose. Eleanor focused on the Winters family records while Ryan investigated the final days of the Civil War and the circumstances of Thomas's death. As evening approached, Ryan called Eleanor to his workstation. I think I found something. Thomas Winters wasn't just any soldier. He was carrying important dispatches when he was killed at Petersburg. What kind of dispatches? Communications between Union generals about the final push to end the war. Ryan showed her a military report. His body was recovered, but the dispatches were missing. The Union command feared they'd been captured by Confederate forces. Eleanor leaned closer. Were they? No. According to this report from April 20th, 1865, 2 days after the mysterious photograph, the dispatches were anonymously delivered to Union headquarters. They claimed the papers were found on the battlefield, but military intelligence suspected something stranger had occurred. Eleanor felt pieces clicking into place. Thomas returned to deliver the dispatches, completing his mission. But first, he kept his promise to his brother by sitting for the photograph, which means his current ... activity ... must be related to another unfinished task. Ryan looked uncomfortable with the direction of their investigation. But what could possibly remain undone after 160 years? Eleanor stared at the photograph, at Thomas Winter's knowing smile. I think he's trying to tell us. The lights in the archive flickered, as if in response to her words. The storm returned that night, more violent than before. Lightning illuminated Eleanor's apartment in strobing flashes as she spread the Winters documents across her living room floor. She had brought copies home, unable to shake the feeling that time was somehow running short. The historical record showed that after Thomas Winter's death, his twin brother James had never fully recovered from the loss. James had married but had no children, living a quiet life in the family's Brookline estate until his death in 1912. The Winters line had continued through their younger brother, leading eventually to Margaret Winters, the last of the family. But what connected these historical figures to the present day? What unfinished business could drive a spirit to remain restless for more than a century and a half? A thunderous crash shook the apartment, followed by darkness as the power failed again. Eleanor lit candles, creating islands of light in the gloom. As she returned to her research, a cold draft swept through the room, though all windows were closed. The candle flames bent sideways, pointing toward the front door. Eleanor froze, listening. The sound was subtle at first, water dripping onto hardwood. Drip, drip, drawing closer. Her breath clouded in suddenly frigid air as she turned toward the sound. In the dim light, she could make out a trail of wet footprints materializing on her floor, one after another, approaching where she sat surrounded by documents about Thomas Winters. Eleanor's academic detachment abandoned her. She scrambled backward until she hit the wall, watching as the invisible presence stopped at the edge of her research materials. The papers rustled as if being examined by unseen hands. Then, impossibly, one of the pages began to change. Words appeared on the margin of a battlefield map, written in an elegant 19th-century hand. It will happen again. The betrayal, the death. Find the letter. The footprints moved away toward the door, then vanished. The temperature gradually returned to normal. With shaking hands, Eleanor photographed the message, then called Ryan. I know it's late, she said when he answered groggily, but something just happened. Thomas Winters wrote a message in my apartment. Ryan arrived 30 minutes later, his skepticism visibly faltering when he saw the handwritten note. This matches Thomas's handwriting from his service letters, he confirmed. It will happen again, Eleanor read. The betrayal. The death. What betrayal? What letter? Ryan paced the small apartment. Maybe Thomas wasn't just killed in battle. Maybe he was betrayed somehow, and the letter could be evidence of that betrayal. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with supernatural presence. Ryan, I think Thomas Winters is trying to prevent history from repeating itself. But what history? The Civil War is long over. Eleanor stared at the battlefield map where the message had appeared. It showed Petersburg, where Thomas had died. Not the war itself, something more specific, something personal. They worked through the night, reviewing every document related to Thomas Winters' final days. As dawn broke, Ryan found a reference in a captain's journal, concerns about a potential informant in the ranks, someone feeding information to Confederate forces. The captain suspected someone in Thomas's unit, Ryan said, but no proof was ever found. Eleanor thought of the missing dispatches that had mysteriously reappeared after Thomas's ghostly visit to the photography studio. What if Thomas wasn't just killed in battle? What if he was deliberately put in harm's way by someone who wanted those dispatches? A traitor in his unit? Ryan looked skeptical. Wouldn't military intelligence have investigated that? They did, according to these reports. But the investigation was inconclusive. Eleanor rubbed her tired eyes. And Thomas's message says it will happen again. Whatever he's warning about isn't just historical, it's happening now. Ryan's phone chimed with a text message. He checked it, then looked up with alarm. It's from the security office. Someone broke into the archives again last night. The Winters photograph is missing. The Historical Society was in chaos when Eleanor and Ryan arrived. Police officers took statements from staff while security personnel reviewed footage. Martin Chun, the society's director, pulled them aside, his face ashen. This is a disaster, he hissed. A priceless historical artifact stolen on my watch. Have the police found anything? Eleanor asked. Nothing useful. The thief knew how to avoid the cameras. Martin ran a hand through his hair. The strange thing is, nothing else was taken. Not even items of greater monetary value in the same room. Eleanor exchanged a meaningful look with Ryan. Has Margaret Winters been notified? Not yet. I wanted to have more information first. Martin sighed. Eleanor, I know you've been researching the Winters materials intensively. Did you notice anyone showing unusual interest? Anyone asking questions? Eleanor thought carefully before answering. No one specific. But I'd like to see the security footage if possible. In the security office, they reviewed the night's recordings. Unlike the previous footage showing the supernatural presence, this break-in appeared conventional. A figure in dark clothing, face obscured, moved with purpose through the archives directly to the preservation case containing the Winters photograph. They knew exactly where to go, Ryan observed. And how to disable the alarm on the case, added the security officer. This wasn't opportunistic. It was targeted. Eleanor focused on the thief's movements. Something about them seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. Can you check footage from the past week? See if this person visited during regular hours? After 30 minutes of reviewing visitor footage, Eleanor spotted what she was looking for. There, she pointed. 3 days ago. Same build, same gait. The daytime footage showed a young man, early 20s, examining the Civil War exhibition with intense interest. He lingered at the description of the Winters materials, though the photograph itself wasn't on public display. I know him, Ryan said suddenly. He's been in the reading room several times. Said he was researching a family history project. Did he give a name? Eleanor asked. James something. Wait. Ryan pulled out his phone and checked his notes. James Winters. He claimed to be a distant relative. Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle over her. But Margaret Winters said she was the last of the line. I'll call campus security, Martin said. They can check if anyone by that name is registered as a student. While Martin made the call, Eleanor returned to the archives. The empty preservation case seemed to mock her. Without the photograph, their connection to Thomas Winters and his warning was severed. Or was it? On impulse, Eleanor pulled on gloves and reopened the case. Something caught her eye, a small corner of paper, torn from the edge of the photograph, left behind during the hasty theft. She carefully placed it in an evidence bag. Martin returned with information. No James Winters registered at any local universities. The name was fake. But the interest in the Winters family wasn't, Eleanor mused. Ryan, what did this James research while he was here? Ryan checked the reading room request forms. Military records from the 20th Massachusetts. And the Winters family papers. Any specific documents? Actually, he requested Thomas Winters' personal effects inventory multiple times. Eleanor remembered the inventory they'd discussed during the storm, the list of items found on Thomas's body. Was he looking for something specific? I don't know. But he seemed frustrated, like he couldn't find what he wanted. Eleanor thought of Thomas's ghostly message. Find the letter. What if there was something that wasn't on the inventory? Something Thomas had hidden? Ryan's eyes widened. Like evidence of betrayal? Exactly. Eleanor felt energy surge through her despite her fatigue. And what if our thief is somehow connected to the original betrayal? It will happen again, Thomas wrote. But that was 160 years ago, Ryan protested. How could anyone still care about a Civil War betrayal? Families remember, Eleanor said, thinking of Margaret Winters and her preservation of family history, especially when there's something valuable at stake. They drove to the Winters estate, hoping Margaret might have insights about the theft and the mysterious James. The grand house looked different in daylight, less imposing, more faded, like an old photograph itself. The housekeeper who answered the door informed them that Margaret had been taken to the hospital early that morning after a fall. She was in stable condition but being kept for observation. Did anyone visit Mrs. Winters yesterday? Eleanor asked. Just Dr. Keller, the housekeeper replied. He's been the family physician for years. Dr. Keller? Ryan asked. About 50, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses. The housekeeper nodded. Aside, Ryan turned to Eleanor with concern. The man she described matches one of our regular researchers. He's been accessing Civil War medical records for months, claiming to be writing a book. Eleanor felt the pieces shifting into a new pattern. Call the hospital. Make sure Margaret Winters is protected. I think we've found our betrayal. Boston Medical Center hummed with activity as Eleanor and Ryan hurried through the main entrance. At the information desk, they received disturbing news. Dr. Michael Keller had arrived 20 minutes earlier and gone to Margaret Winters' room. We need to call security, Eleanor told the receptionist. That man is not her doctor. As hospital security was notified, Eleanor and Ryan took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The corridor was quiet, most patients resting behind closed doors. Margaret's room was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. Inside, they found Margaret Winters awake in her hospital bed, looking pale but alert. Standing by the window was a man matching Dr. Keller's description, holding the stolen Winters photograph. Dr. Hayes, Margaret said, her voice surprisingly calm. I've been expecting you. Keller turned, unsurprised by their entrance. Eleanor Hayes, the persistent historian. His tone was conversational, as if they were meeting at an academic conference. And Ryan Chun, such dedicated researchers. Eleanor assessed the situation quickly. Hospital security would arrive soon, but they needed to keep Keller talking. "You're not writing a book on Civil War medicine, are you, Dr. Keller?" "Not exactly." He smiled thinly. "Though I am very interested in certain aspects of Civil War history, family history specifically." "You're related to someone in Thomas Winter's unit," Eleanor guessed, recalling their research on potential betrayal. "Very good." Keller nodded appreciatively. "My great-great-grandfather was Lieutenant Edward Keller, second in command of Corporal Winter's company." Ryan moved slightly closer to Margaret's bed. "The officer who sent Thomas Winters on his final mission. The officer who was investigated for possible treason after the war," Eleanor added, remembering the military records. "But never charged due to lack of evidence." "Evidence that would have existed," Keller said bitterly, "if Winters hadn't somehow managed to deliver those dispatches after his death." He held up the photograph. "My family has tracked this ghost story for generations. We always knew there was a letter, a confession my ancestor wrote, implicating himself." Margaret Winters spoke up. "Thomas hid the letter before he died. The family legend says he concealed evidence that would destroy the Keller's name." Keller's expression hardened. "A letter that would tarnish my family's distinguished military legacy. 5 generations of service, all overshadowed by one alleged act of treason." "So you posed as a researcher to gain access to the Winters materials," Eleanor said, "looking for clues to the letter's location. And when you couldn't find it, you stole the photograph," Ryan continued. "But why? What's the connection?" Keller turned the photograph toward them. "Look closely at Thomas Winter's uniform." "What do you see?" Eleanor examined the image. In the breast pocket of the uniform was a small bulge, something concealed there. "The letter." "Precisely." Keller's voice held triumph. "Thomas Winters hid the letter on his body. When he returned for the photograph, the letter came with him, preserved in the image itself." The absurdity of the situation, a respected physician believing in a ghost story. Hunting for evidence hidden in a supernatural photograph might have been laughable in other circumstances. Yet Eleanor had seen too much to dismiss it. "And now you plan to destroy the photograph and the evidence it contains," she said. "I'm protecting my family, just as you would protect yours." Keller reached into his pocket and produced a lighter. "The Winters family has kept this secret long enough." "That photograph belongs to the Historical Society," Ryan protested. "It's part of our shared cultural heritage." "It's a historical artifact," Eleanor added, stalling for time. "Destroying it won't change what happened 160 years ago." Keller hesitated, the lighter unlit in his hand. "Perhaps not. But history is written by the survivors, Dr. Hayes. My ancestor ensured our family's place in Boston society through his sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Is that what you call betraying 42 men to their deaths for Confederate gold?" Keller's face contorted with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, old woman. I know more than you think." Margaret reached beneath her blanket and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. "I found this yesterday, hidden in the frame backing of another Winters portrait. After you left, Dr. Keller, I realized what you were really searching for." Eleanor saw hospital security appear in the doorway behind Keller, but she motioned them to wait. "The letter," Keller whispered, his attention completely fixed on the aged envelope in Margaret's hand. "After all this time, double quotes, Thomas Winters sent 2 letters the day he sat for that photograph," Margaret said, her voice growing stronger. "One to his brother James, which my family preserved. And this one, addressed to the Union Command, which James hid to protect someone. Give it to me." Keller took a step toward the bed, but Ryan moved protectively between them. Eleanor carefully approached Margaret. "May I?" Margaret nodded, handing her the envelope. It was sealed with wax, the impression bearing the insignia of the 20th Massachusetts Infantry. The paper was fragile but intact, preserved for generations. "Lieutenant Keller wasn't just feeding information to Confederate forces," Margaret continued. "According to family accounts, he was planning to defect with the regiment's payroll gold meant for soldiers' families." Eleanor examined the envelope. "Thomas discovered the plan, and Edward Keller arranged for him to be killed," Ryan concluded, the historical pieces finally aligning. Keller's composure cracked. "You can't prove any of this. It's hearsay, folklore, the ramblings of an old family trying to remain relevant." "The letter will prove it," Eleanor said quietly. "That's why Thomas Winters has been trying to guide us to it. Not for revenge, but to prevent another betrayal." Keller laughed bitterly. Another betrayal? What are you talking about? The Boston Veterans Memorial Fund, Margaret said, her eyes fixed on Keller. You're the chairman, overseeing millions in donations for the new Civil War memorial. Eleanor saw understanding dawn on Ryan's face. The fund that's been plagued by accounting irregularities according to last month's Globe article. Unfounded allegations, Keller snapped, but his hand tightened around the lighter. The audit will clear everything. Unless the money is already gone, Margaret said, history repeating itself. Another Keller betraying a trust for personal gain. For a moment, the room was silent except for the steady beep of Margaret's heart monitor. Then Keller lunged forward, reaching for the letter in Eleanor's hand. Hospital security rushed in, restraining Keller as he struggled. The photograph fell to the floor, sliding across the polished tiles. The evidence is gone, Keller shouted as he was handcuffed. You can't prove anything without Thomas Winter's testimony, and he's been dead for 160 years. As security led Keller away, Eleanor carefully picked up the fallen photograph. The image had changed again. Thomas Winter's smile had softened, and the bulge in his breast pocket was gone. Look, she whispered to Ryan. The letter isn't in the photograph anymore. Because it's here now, Margaret said, nodding toward the envelope in Eleanor's hand. Thomas finally completed his mission. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in the Massachusetts Historical Society's main gallery, surveying the new exhibition, Beyond the Grave, The Extraordinary Case of Corporal Thomas Winters. The controversial title had been Martin Chun's idea, a way to capitalize on the publicity surrounding the case. A centerpiece of the exhibition was the restored Winters photograph, returned to its preservation case after being examined for evidence. Beside it, protected by bulletproof glass, lay the opened letter that had ultimately led to Michael Keller's arrest and the recovery of over $2 million from offshore accounts. Quite the crowd, Ryan commented, joining Eleanor by the display. I never thought I'd see teenagers voluntarily visiting a historical exhibition. Eleanor smiled. Nothing attracts interest like a good ghost story, especially one with actual evidence. Ryan nodded toward the letter, its text now visible to the public. To Major General William Sherman, I write this in haste, knowing my wound is mortal. L.T.A. Edward Keller of the 20th Massachusetts has betrayed our cause. He has corresponded with Confederate Cola Jameson, providing intelligence on Union movements in exchange for safe passage and a share of our regimental pay. I discovered his plans too late. The dispatches I carried are secure. I have hidden them where Keller cannot find them. I swear by all I hold sacred that I shall see them delivered, even if death takes me first. Lettie Keller arranged for me to be separated from our unit during the advance, placing me directly in the path of enemy fire. As I lay dying, he searched my body for the dispatches but could not find them. I make this accusation with sound mind and clear conscience. May justice prevail, even beyond death. Corporal Thomas Winters, 20th Massachusetts Infantry, March 25, 1865. Forensic analysis had confirmed the authenticity of the letter, written in Thomas Winters' blood on a page torn from his military Bible. Historians from around the country had flocked to Boston to examine what many were calling the most significant Civil War discovery in decades. Hard to believe it's over, Ryan said. The Keller investigation, the Memorial Fund scandal, all of it. I'm not sure Thomas Winters would agree it's over, Eleanor replied, studying the photograph. The image had stabilized since they'd found the letter. No more mysterious changes. No more wet footprints or ghostly messages. Yet something about the soldier's expression remained knowing, as if he had witnessed far more than the brief moment captured by the camera. Margaret Winters joined them, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. Her recovery had been steady, and she had become an unexpected ally in their historical research. Quite the tribute, she observed, gesturing to the crowded gallery. Thomas would be pleased. Do you think he's at peace now? Ryan asked. Now that the truth is known? Margaret considered the question. The Winters family has always believed that obligations transcend death. Thomas fulfilled his duty as a soldier by delivering the dispatches. He fulfilled his duty as a witness by preserving evidence of betrayal. But most importantly, he fulfilled his promise to his brother by returning for that photograph. Eleanor thought of all they had experienced, the impossible changes to the photograph, the messages from beyond the grave, the century-spanning quest for justice. As a historian, she had been trained to question, to seek rational explanations, to build narratives based on verifiable evidence. Some aspects of this case will never be fully explained, she admitted. The scientific community is already proposing theory psychic imprinting, collective hallucination, even quantum entanglement between the photograph and actual events. And what do you believe, Dr. Hayes? Margaret asked. Eleanor studied the photograph one last time. In the sepia-toned image, Corporal Thomas Winters smiled back at her, a young man who had died with unfinished business, whose determination had somehow transcended the boundaries between life and death. "I believe some bonds are stronger than death," she said finally, "and some stories refuse to be forgotten." As they turned to leave, Eleanor glanced back at the exhibition. For just a moment, she thought she saw a reflection in the glass case, a Union soldier standing at attention, his duty finally complete. Then the image was gone, leaving only the eternal smile of Thomas Winters, preserved for all time in a photograph taken weeks after his death.